we can go ahead and kick it off. I'm THC, as just said. I'm here today with some people from Dimension X. It's a blockchain game on Flow, soon to be ETH, but I will save those intros for you. If you guys could just maybe go around and introduce yourselves and let me know, a little bit about either how you got started in Dimension X or how you got into Web3. Just a little foundation for us.
Yeah, happy to do so. I'm Mike. I'm the CEO over at Cryptulu. Cryptulu is the company that makes Dimension X. Background, I've been in free to play games for, I don't know, over 12 years now. I think I'm getting close to 15. Um, I started a million years ago on MySpace games, if you remember those. Did you ever play any of those like super old school MySpace games, or am I dating myself?
Oh no, man, absolutely. I was enthralled.
Got it. Yeah. So I broke into games doing social games a million years ago before they blew up. And then basically did free to play games for a very long time until I started my own free to play game publishing company called Iron Horse Games. And that's where I met most of my co founders. So almost every one of our co founders at Cryptulu was an independent developer previously who was making their own games on iOS and Android. We'd worked together on a bunch of games previously. And they'd done a bunch of installs and revenue. So I think Iron Horse across the entire portfolio did over like 20 million installs on iOS and Android, and a substantial amount of in-app purchase and ad revenue too. And individually, we had a lot of awards that we had all picked up too. So I did a game on Apple that got Game of the Day in the United States called Uncivil War, which is a card battle game. And then our CTO Mark had a game called Tap Tap Dig. I think collectively that had over like 5 million installs and got editor's choice on Google Play, which is pretty cool. Darren and I Darren's our creative director. We worked on Idle Mine RPG together that did over 1 million installs and did really well on Android. And then Devin and I worked on a bunch of games, including Idlewell and Tap Squadron. So we'd all worked together on a bunch of different free to play games before. We had a lot of success. In the, I want to say like mid 2021, I had a buddy reach out to me who had started working in Web3, and he's like, "You should really look into it." And I was like, "Nah, I don't want to do that." I don't like. What was your first reaction when people told you about Web3? It was skeptical, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, somebody told me to get Bitcoin in like 2017. I was like, yeah, I'll pass on the Chuck E. Cheese tokens, man. No thanks.
Exactly. I've been to a Dave and Buster's. No, thank you.
Right.
Um, so yeah, he gave me the pitch, which turned out to be a real turning point for me. So he asked a handful of questions, and I knew it was rehearsed, but you know that feeling where you're like walking into somebody's verbal trap, but you can't help it, so you just do it.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
So he did the whole thing. He was like, "Oh, what's your favorite game?" I'm like, "Rob, you know my favorite game, man." He's like, "Say it." Fine. World of Warcraft. I've played it forever, on and off. It's like bowling at this point. Bunch of old men get together and play games. It's like, well, what do you own in World of Warcraft? It's like, Rob, you know what I own in World of Warcraft? He's like, say it. I own my characters. It's like, bullshit. You don't own your characters. You rent them. It was that moment where I was like, maybe there's something to this thing with NFTs and games.
Totally, man. Yeah.
And it was the first time anybody had really articulated like a really clear use case with blockchain for anything to me. Like I kind of vaguely understood the use case for crypto and why it's important to have a currency that's divorced from governments and whatever their objectives are. And I kind of vaguely understood its use case for games, but this was the first like crystal clear example somebody had given to me that really resonated in a personal way. So I pitched the team. We put together some pitches. We started working in January. I went out and raised money starting at the end of January, last week in January, and we closed our funding round the second week of March, which was super, super fast. And the rest is history. We built Dimension X in 9 months. It really took 6 months because we built an entirely different game for the first 3 months and then threw that in the garbage. So Dimension X, start to finish, took 6 months. We built on the Flow blockchain, and we launched the game on the day that we had a free mint. And the rest is kind of history. We're now at, I don't know, 800 to 1,000 DAU, a mix of free to play players and NFT holders. We passed 2.3 million in secondary market volume, and we're on the cusp of an Ethereum launch with an Ethereum mint, and that's how we're talking here today.
Love it, man. Yeah, thank you for all of the background. And just to be sure, are you the only speaker here today? I just want to make sure I'm not excluding anybody.
Just me.
Okay, cool.
Those heroes come with 3 powers, and your goal is to go to one of the boards that's currently live in the game. Their quests. You're gonna go into the quest and put heroes on the board, and the simplest version of what you're doing is trying to match up a hero's powers with the powers that are represented on each of the 9 tiles on the board. So if you see a fire, like a tile that's got fire and ice, and you have a fire and ice hero, you want to match those up because it increases the DPS that hero is going to deal. Your goal is to try and deal the most DPS out of all the people that are playing on the board at any given time. And if you do, you get rewarded in in-game currency called Thul, THUL. And if you get 1,000 of those Thule points, you can mint a hero that's got some unique characteristics called boons. And we introduce a new boon every 3 to 4 months. At its most basic level, that's Dimension X. It's an idle role-playing game where you're trying to deal the most DPS possible, and you're competing against every other player at the same time on every quest in the game at the same time.
Beautifully said. It's like you've done this before or something. It's like you've. Okay, perfect. So it's something I don't want to gloss over. That's not necessarily part of the gameplay, but something that I know is very prevalent with Dimension X is the sort of, well, first of all, the art, right? Like I think it's very, very good pixel art. I think it resonates with a lot of people. It's very clean and uniform. But then also, you guys keep it rolling with the sort of like the collabs and the honoraries and the customs and even the bosses and stuff are the heroes that appear in the game. Seems like these are a lot of the times community sourced through.
Yep.
Sort of just, everybody just gives their ideas and you guys draw them up, put them in. That's super dope, man. Could you talk about that maybe for a sec?
I can. So yeah, one of the things that we try as much as possible to like examine some of the things that are said in Web3 and then take them at face value, right? So when I first got into Web3, people are like, "Oh, we're building together," right? I'm sure you've heard that a million times. Teams are like, "We're in it together," right? And then that team will be like, "We're totally in it together after you mint out this Genesis mint and help de-risk the entire project for the team," right? And that always hit weird for me. Whereas like, well, are you really in it together? Because like one part of this equation just bought a whole bunch of NFTs and de-risked the project for the other part of the equation. If you were actually in it together, you would do free. And then whatever happens, happens. But that way, you're all starting from the same spot together. Or if anything, the team's starting from a deficit because they spent a lot of time building the game. The other thing I heard a lot in Web3 when we first got in was this sense of like, "Oh, we listen to our community, we're transparent, and we're accountable." And I was like, well, shit, if that's what Web3 is about, count me in. I love it, right? I love being transparent with the community almost to a fault, and I'm more than willing to work together and be accountable with them. If we make mistakes, I'll eat it, but if we have successes, we'll celebrate those together. So one of the things that we really tried to do is cultivate a Discord community that we actually listen to, and the simplest way to do that is you reward people who make recommendations that are helpful but critical, right? We get a lot of feedback on Dimension X. Sometimes it's served up well, sometimes it's served up poorly. It doesn't matter how it's served, you should listen to it. And when we do listen to it, we acknowledge that we heard it. We come up with a response to it as a team, and usually that gets incorporated in the game. That can take the form of like, the community choosing what the next min is going to be in an event. And it can also take the form of like, hey, we rolled out a bunch of new features and the community doesn't like them, so we got rid of them, even though we thought they were cool, right? I feel like that leaning into the unique aspects of Web3 is the whole point. And if you're not going to do it, why are you here?
Absolutely, man. Yeah, I love that top to bottom. I mean, the philosophy of the whole free mint, share some risk with the company. We all want some equity in this game, right? So let's start on an even playing field, but then also, yeah, the community collaboration, which we believe in too. That's our whole thing. So if you guys want, if the community listening here live, if you guys want to interact and collaborate on this particular event, then feel free to drop your questions and guest questions, and we'll make sure to get those answered. But okay, so cool. So you did the free mint on Flow. You're cranking along. You got a bunch of active users. What was that? What was the launch like on Flow? Because I actually haven't had the opportunity or the pleasure to talk to somebody on Flow. So, are there any unique hurdles or challenges there? Any extra incentives of building over on Flow, or how was that experience for you guys?
Yeah. What was the launch like on Flow? It was bumpy. We had a couple really rough days after launch. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. I think anybody that was there was like, there's some downtime, but mostly it was fine. Um, I think we were taking time on Ethereum because of the launch on Flow, right? We pushed to get out pretty quickly, and I think it probably could have baked for another week or two, and we would have avoided a lot of hiccups that we had at launch. So that's why we're taking our time with the Ethereum version. In terms of some of the things that were appealing to us about the Flow blockchain, one of the things I did when we were looking at chains at the time, and this was back in early 2022 and the winter of 2021, we were looking around trying to figure out where to land. A lot of the sentiment at the time was around onboarding Web2 users, right? Like, what title is going to be the one that brings the masses, quote unquote, into the game? And from a free to play background, I knew that one of the things that we had to keep a really keen eye on was like the wallet onboarding experience. That if you ever had a hope of onboarding like a huge number of Web2 users in mass, you needed a really clean wallet onboarding experience. If you've never been on Flow and never used Dapper Wallet, it's about as clean as it gets. You put in an email and that's it, right? You got a wallet. It's custodial. They take care of it. And there's some issues with that, obviously, but at the time and still today, it's a great like new user onboarding experience. And our thinking there was like, well, we can position ourselves in the game to be the recipient of a lot of Web2 users in the event that they show up. Obviously, didn't happen, but that was some of the thinking that went into going to Flow. The other thinking there, and I think this is a really important one to kind of wrap your head around, if you look at like the top, and we looked at this probably, I don't know, a year ago or so at the point, or before that, even a year and a half. If you look at the top 10 projects across all of Web3, there's some really interesting characteristics in the top 10, right? There's the Ethereum projects, and those are really whale dense projects. There's a huge amount of volume, but that volume is being driven by a relatively small cohort of users, relatively speaking. So like Bored Apes, Punks, Azuki, like some of the most well-known projects in crypto and Web3, you're talking like thousands of whales on each driving enormous Ethereum, but it's really a small group of users, relatively speaking. The one project that stood out on that top 10 list all time was Top Shot. And the thing about Top Shot that was so interesting to is that the number of unique transacting wallets on Top Shot lifetime, but also, if you look at it relative to any other project, pretty big. There are a lot of people transacting at a lot of different price points on Top Shot. There are people who are transacting for $5. There are people who are transacting for 5,000 bucks. There are people who are flipping moments for $1. There are people who are flipping moments trying to make bigger margins. There are people who are just hardcore collectors, but there's this very wide spectrum of spend profiles associated with people who are trading at Top Shot. And for me, with a free to play game, I was like, that's the sweet spot. If you're going to have a bunch of different types of assets with different types of utility, the whole thing's free. You're not sure how it's going to perform in terms of the cost of the NFTs themselves. You should cast the widest net possible to capture all different spend profiles that are associated with Web3. And the Flow blockchain and Dapper really uniquely represented that in the past, and I think they still do today.
Yeah, makes ton of sense when you explain it that way. Just sort of the user onboarding experience, and also just yeah, like you said, cast a wide net, try to capture as many as possible. So that seems like Flow would check all those boxes for you. So okay, cool. Yeah, free launch. You know, cranking along on Flow. We're here now, and now we are doing a mint on Ethereum. So could you maybe talk us through what that's going to look like, and then well, we can pick it apart a little bit later and sort of how it's going to affect the game and economy and stuff like that. But just talk us through the mint. How's it going to go?
Yeah, so we obviously we wanted to onboard new users into Dimension X, and we had tried the route of onboarding Web2 users onto a Web3 product, and then the market was like, "That is adorable that you thought that that was going to happen," right? Like Terra Luna happened. A lot of Web2 users got really skittish about Web3. There's a lot of stigma attached to it. So, I'm not saying it's never going to happen with Web2 users onboarding in mass to a Web3 game, but it's going to take a little bit of time. So, we're in this unique position where last October, DAUs were booming on Dimension X. We're getting a lot of installs or of attention. The secondary market was humming. And then I made the announcement to the community that we're going to do an Ethereum version of the game. And they were like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" I remember it to this day. They're like, "What are you doing, man?"
I remember the sentiment as well. Yeah, just as an onlooker. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Everyone's like, That's the dumb. Why? Like, you're doing well on Flow." And I was like, "I know we're doing Flow. But my job is to look down the train tracks to see what's going to be coming." And when I looked down the tracks, I was like, "What's the most common problem that every game I've ever worked on runs into?" The answer is user acquisition. Where are you going to get more users? And it doesn't matter if it's a mobile game, it doesn't matter if it's a Web3 game. The reality, if you're not getting users, um, the game's going to really struggle. So I started looking around and I was like, "Well, where are the users?" And everyone was like, "Well, the users are all in Ethereum." Well, why don't we go there? They're like, "Well, there are not a lot of games on Ethereum." It's like, "Great, that's out. Is this a problem? This sounds good." Like, I didn't understand why that would be an issue. I was like, "Well, you're telling me that there's a bunch of users, there's a ton of transacting volume that's happening on the Ethereum blockchain. There's not a ton of viable Web3 games that are fun and worth playing. This sounds like a huge opportunity." Folks were like, "Oh, you should look at L2s and side chains." And my feedback at the time, and I think it's going to be justified here over the next couple months, was like, I think side chains try and have their cake and eat it too, right? Side chains like Polygon or Immutable X are like, "Oh, we're just like Ethereum." And it's like, well, why don't you have as many wallets? If you're identical to Ethereum, why isn't your transaction volume identical to? And they're like, "Oh, because you have to like bridge over and there's all these other steps." And I was like, "Well, then you're not identical to Ethereum." They're like, "No, bridging's not that big of a deal." And I was like, "Well, if it wasn't that big of a deal, wouldn't you have the same volume that Ethereum would have, or something really much closer?" Um, the other thing there that I think L2s were trying to pitch, and I've always been super skeptical about it, is like the scalability of Web3 tech, right? From day one that I've gotten into the space, everybody and their uncle has been like, "Oh, Mike, we've got the most scalable tech, right? Like we can handle all of your needs." And it's totally bullshit. It's 100% bull. Any game at all would represent like Dimension X. If we put it entirely on, I would break an entire blockchain with the amount of transactions that were happening on a regular basis. You just break it.
Right. Yeah. Totally. Yeah.
So they're not scalable. They're not built to be scalable. They're not built to work with games. And so a key selling point for L2s, they're like, we've got the same liquidity as bullshit. You don't. They're like, "Okay, well, we're scalable." I was like, "I don't need you to be scalable. I haven't built the game to be heavily on chain because none of this is scalable." Right? Like the core premise that bleeding edge tech that's been around for like 6 months to a year is going to be scalable and meet the needs of a free to play title is nonsense. Um, So yeah, we looked at Ethereum and we're like, that's where the users are. That's where the transacting volume is. That's where an absence of good Web3 games exists, and that's where we're going because I know those users are there. Unlike with Web2, where folks are like, oh yeah, we're gonna like that's not a strategy, that's a hope. I want to go to a place where I know there are users, where I know that there's transacting volume, and I know that there are people that want to play a good game. Simple as that.
Totally. And you're all sort of, I mean, the approach that you guys took to the game sort of lends itself well to Ethereum anyway, right? Because you just stake the asset in and then everything happens off chain anyway, right?
That's right. That's
Yeah,
exactly.
that's beautiful. Yeah. So there's no difference between Flow or Arbitrum or a side chain or just Ethereum. Like you said, so you might as well be on the premier chain, right?
Yeah, there's going to be some gas. There's gas when you mint. There's gas when you stake into the game and unstake. We use staking. I think a lot of people make the mistake of using staking as a gameplay mechanic, right? Like, oh, stake him to this location, and you're going to generate some shit token that can be used in some other part of the game. It's like that's not fun, right? Staking is a tool. It's a technical tool, and it's got real utility. Staking for us basically removes any conflicts that could happen if you were to sell a character while playing the game. So you imagine if there's no staking or unstaking in Dimension X, you were playing the game, somebody bought your character off the store. All of a sudden, our marketplace is recording two wallets at the same time that have the same asset in it. And then your DPS at some point is going to drop. You're not going to be aware of it. There's all these issues. With staking, you can just be like, no, that character can't be sold because it's staked into the game. If you want to sell it, unstake it, take it out. No big whoop.
Totally. Yeah. It's a good solution for the gas. I mean, I think the gas when you're staking and unstaking is minimal. It's just the cost of doing business, right? The cost of being, in Web3, if you will. But okay, so talk to me about price. Is this going to be a free mint like it was on Flow, or is this going to be a paid mint for your Ethereum launch?
Free mint. Um,
Free mint, love it.
yeah, dude. One of the things we're really focused on, a lot of people ask about the free mint and they're like, well, how are you going to make money? Like, what's the plan? I'm like, well, here it is. Free mints are a marketing tool, and they're the most effective marketing tool in all of Web3. And I feel like they haven't fully kind of grasped that concept yet. Like, the reason that we're doing so many collabs and we're reaching out to so many people, and we're trying to make sure that as many unique wallets as possible have a Dimension X NFT is because every one of those unique wallets represents a potential player in the future, right? Every one of them. We know it's going to consolidate down. It always does. That's what happened on Flow. But we're trying to cast our NFTs as wide as possible so that we can capture as many players as possible, right? The whole point of this thing is to get as many users into the game as possibly can. From there, after the free mint, we're going to have, so it's a 10K free mint. We've got some for a snapshot from existing Flow players. So they'll get some NFTs. And then we're doing the allow list raffle like this, where we give spots away to different communities. And we're also doing one for ones. So like custom NFTs, which I think you posted on Twitter before the space. I think there are about 200 custom NFTs, 10K mint. And then we're going to also have an in-game store. In the in-game store, we're going to sell NFTs as well to players that come into the game. And that'll be a mix of like Genesis heroes, but also boon heroes that are unavailable on ETH at this point. So that's the model, right? Get as many unique players as you possibly can. Let them understand and play the game, play with fun assets, compete against each other. And then we'll have additional NFTs that we sell through the game. And then there'll be royalties that we generate from transactions on the secondary marketplace.
Gotcha. Okay. Question about sort of two instances of the game running simultaneously.
Uh-huh.
Few questions that pop up. First and most obvious is going to be, is there any cross play potential there for the assets on different chains?
Yeah, good question. Right now, we're thinking about it like Call of Duty, right? If you play Call of Duty on Xbox, it's a separate experience than playing Call of Duty on PlayStation. So right now, the two versions of the game are siloed from the collection on Flow is not going to interact with the collection on Ethereum. in a meaningful way. And we felt like that was really important because we want your collections to kind of matter on the chain that you're on. We obviously know that like people will want to play on different chains depending on what their needs are in terms of playing the game. So we have a lot of flow players that were like, hey, I want to bring my whole collection over. Like, yeah, bro, that's not happening. Like, why? Like, well, you would just beat the daylights out of any other ETH player that doesn't have heroes as strong as yours. It doesn't have the same team strategy, and then you have this uh, all these other issues that crop up where your NFTs are no longer NFT, right? They're FTs because there's an identical version or NFT on the other chain. So, like that, there's a ton of problems associated. I told them I can't do that. What we can do is say, all right, we're going to introduce cross-chain mint. Play the game on Flow, or you can play the game on Ethereum. You can earn 1,000 different version of the game, separate, right? So you got to earn 1,000 on Flow to mint, or 1,000 on ETH to mint. You can't earn 500 on ETH. What you can do is take the 1,000 on Flow, and you can choose which chain you want that in. So you can play on Flow and create a collection on Ethereum. And that was a way for us to say, hey, like you can keep playing on the chain you're on, keep the collection on the other chain, and then vice versa. You can imagine a use case where Ethereum version of the want to build up a collection on the Flow version. Tired of like I want to go on a gas, or I want to move like I'm moving over to Flow, start building. So we built that cross chain minting to accommodate.
That's pretty smart. I was going to give you a heads up. You're cutting out just a little bit. It's not enough to completely ruin the message, but just missing little chunks there. But okay, so I got you. So yeah, it's separate servers, if you will, where you're playing, but you can choose to mint your new hero with your Thol to whatever chain you choose.
That's right.
You know what? That actually answers one of the questions I was going to have for later, man. I saw a screenshot. Somebody had like 12,000 Thol. I was like, how is that even possible? First off, seems like an impossible number. But then I'm like, why aren't they spending it? So I guess if players are crushing right now on Flow and they have a big stockpile of Thol, they could probably just mint a whole new team once the Ethereum one comes out, right?
That's right. We're pacing that out too. One of the discussions we had with the community, because the community was, hey, day one, we want to be able to mint like a dozen really powerful heroes from. Yeah, I got some bad news for you. No. They're like, why? I'm like, well, the answer is you think about what it would be like to be an Ethereum, right? Come into the game, you've got your new mints, you're playing, you've got an awesome team, and then all of a sudden somebody shows up with NFTs that you haven't been able to mint yet, and they just beat the daylights out of you on the like that would be a terrible gameplay experience for folks who are
Not
just
going to
trying
feel
to
good.
beat. Yeah.
Yeah, because the answer is all I spent a bunch of money, or I've just I've had an unfair. I've been playing for a year before you even started, but like on a different game. Yeah, that'd be kind of wild just to get beat up on.
That's right. So we're putting in a delay in there for several weeks for cross chain minting to make sure that's basically when flow players decide to do that kind of minting when they come in, they'll be coming into a more competitive landscape where folks have already seen and have got an experience. For us is making sure that it's fair competition. We are very big advocates of the idea that skills should be the main determining factor of an outcome in the game, right? We had people in the early game on Dimension X come in and be like, hey, I spent $7,000. Why am I not winning? And I was like, oh, my sweet baby boy, picked the wrong game. Like, that's not, you're going to have to work. You're going to have to put in effort. Even our whales, our top players, are spending a significant amount of time planning out their board strategies at the highest level. And they have to do that if they want to win. The game at its core is competitive. Winning requires
the gameplay loop that we can expect for Dimension X pretty much going forward, just refining this sort of plan the board, place the pieces, and let them, sort of idle DPS for you.
Yeah, I think so. One of the things we spend a lot of the time doing is playing around with like dungeon mechanics and deck builder mechanics. So we've had a dungeon version of the game that's been in dev for quite some time that we keep tinkering around with. So I'd ex- I would expect to see variations of the core gameplay. One of the key differences between working on mobile and working on web is we found that like web users and Web3 users in particular reward you for gameplay depth and complexity, right? They want something that they can sink their teeth into. It shouldn't be, the game shouldn't be extraordinarily complex for the sake of being complicated. But we found that like on mobile, if you're too complicated out of the gate too early, users just leave. They're like, nah, that's not for me. That's not what I was looking for. In a Web3 game on web, being complicated actually rewards you. You got a lot of players that really want to unpack the features and dive into it. So we've really leaned into that. Gear crafting is a big part of the game. That's been a really great addition. We have board modifiers, which have been a really big change. So there are alternative strategies that you can pursue on the board. You'll keep seeing the same components, but we'll have like one or new additional variable that we'll introduce over time to add wrinkles to them, right? Stuff like, oh, here's partial information on a board. Choose a handful of heroes that lock into this board based on the partial information that you have, and then you're making decisions with limited information to help build out the rest of your roster as the board evolves and changes. That's the type of stuff that we lean into as a team, and I'm particularly interested in as well.
I love, man. Yeah. Work with your strengths, right? I mean, I love the idea of, you guys launching the game and a free mint at the same time and actually having the gameplay loop there and ready and people could do it. And then, like you said, you just add wrinkles, right? Placing your characters on the board is the game. So you can add more, wrinkles or hurdles, people to jump over, stuff like that, play with the information, like you said. And dude, the crafting, I got to say, that was a nice addition to the game, like sort of a little game within the game, kind of keep you occupied and add another layer of complexity. So yeah, good stuff. I love that. Love just, same game you can expect, but just more wrinkles.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Love that. All right. So yeah, here in a minute, you guys, we are actually going to be giving away a one of one Dimension X NFT, and that's going to be for the Ethereum game. But before we do, I want to ask one more question, just because we didn't get a chance to touch on it. I know it's a pretty big part of the sort of Dimension X ethos, and that's comic books, right? This whole sort of experience is supposed to be in a comic book universe, and you guys had a comic book mint. I believe they have utility in the game. So you should maybe talk about comic books for just a second and just kind of where it ties in, how important it is to the overall brand.
Yeah, for sure. I'm a huge comic guy. I get comics every week. I've gotten comics every week. I was a kid. One of my favorite things to do is look through old comics at the comic book store and I buy to read. I don't buy to collect. So I've got piles and piles all over the place. So when we were leaning into this, like when we were pitching, and this is, if you've ever pitched to bankers, you really have to like pushing the boundaries of what's acceptable in those meetings game in and of itself. So the first meeting that I had where I was pitching, I was like, they're like, well, how's Dimension X gonna do? And I was like, I have no fucking idea. I'm like, what? It's like, I don't know. Maybe it's gonna be great. Maybe it's not. Every game that I've ever worked on has a 30% chance of success or failure. And like, well, how do you know that this is gonna be a success? I don't. Neither do you. They're like, oh, well, what's the aesthetic? I was like, the aesthetic is pixel art with comic books, but with like a dash of body horror in it. They're like,
just a dash.
And they're like, what did you say? And I was like, body horror, like stuff that makes you extremely uncomfortable to look at. And like, can you give us an example? I was like, you're in luck. The next slide gives you an example. And so I turned the next slide over, and it's a picture of like a gumhead, which is one of our characters. Have you seen the movie Multiplicity?
I haven't.
Okay. It's an old Michael Keaton movie. Basically, he keeps making clones of himself, and the clones make clones of themselves, and each of the dumber previous clone. It's like a photocopy of a photocopy. We have a character in the game who's like that, but you sever a piece of him, and then he'll grow an entirely new version of himself from the piece, right?
Okay.
And that's what the gumheads are. And they're these horrible, disgusting, barfing worm things.
We got some imagery here. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So that's the stuff that I was like, yeah, man, that's what we're going for. And they're like, oh, that's not really heroic. And I was like, oh, there's this other guy. He's a superhero, but he's got a toaster on his head, and he makes toast that gives you superpowers. And they're like, oh, that's not revolting. I was like, yeah, but the toast is shit. And they're like, what? What did you say? I was like, oh, the toast is his. It's like his waste, and it gives you superpowers. And they're like, well, what? And I was like, yeah, but don't worry, it tastes like toast. They're like, they're like, cool. I was like, so that's pretty much our aesthetic. That's what we're going for. And people funded it. So yeah, that's the comic book aesthetic. That's the body horror aesthetic. We lean into like the weird stuff, lean into the stuff that's revolting and interesting. And I think it's fun.
Man, that sounds like a Tom Green pitch meeting or something.
I was unapologetic. I was like, look, man, we're going to do some weird stuff here. And I think people are going to be into it. And they're like, sure, let's do it.
Love that, man. You got good people around you then.
Yeah, for sure.
Love it. All right, cool. We're going to go ahead and run this giveaway. Give me just 1 second. I'm going to fire this up in the office hours chat. It's going to be a Dinobot giveaway. Give me just 1 second. Bear with me here. All right, giveaway is created. So everybody go enter up right now. It's an office hours chat. Then after you're done, if you have any questions here for Mike, you can drop those in guest questions. While they are entering that, and good luck, everybody. Can I enter this? I want to enter. Am I allowed to enter this? I want to enter this.
I think so.
I don't think anyone's going to tell me no.
Go ahead.
All right, I'm in there. I'm up in there. All right, cool. I saw right before you guys came in for this, I saw you guys tweeted out CyberCom's partnership. That seems pretty exciting. Is there anything you can talk about there? Or is it just you said you guys are reaching out to as many communities as possible? Are they just a big get, or what's the relationship there?
Yeah, just a big get. We got introed, so one of the things that I like a lot about our community is we don't ask them for anything, right? Like, I don't ask our community to shill. I won't ask our community to shill. We don't do like likes or retweets or any of that stuff. But one of our community members, when we talked about the Ethereum version of the game, actually several communities are active in other communities, and they said, "Hey, would it be okay if we introduced you to some of these other communities?" It's like, I'd love that. That'd be great. So we were introduced. I told them all the same stuff I'm telling you guys. I was like, it's free mint. We think it's cool. You can play the game now. We're going to have the game launch on the same day that the mint's going to happen. And if you're interested, we'd love to do something together. Give you some launch spots, but no special treatment or favoritism. It's just like free NFTs. Occasionally we'll do some 1-for-1s. If that's interesting to you and you think the game's good and our community is good and we have a shot, then we'd love to do a collab. And if you don't, no harm, no foul. We appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. And the CyberCongs guys were like, yeah, let's rock. Oh, okay.
Love it, man. Yeah, they must have saw what we saw, right?
Yeah, it all kind of kicked off. We did a My Pet Hooligan collab. And I think that really established like some bona fides that we were real people and, we had a real game that was exciting. And then we're also we've got another one coming up with a fairly big name here over the next couple of days, so we'll make an announcement there, which will be pretty exciting too.
Love it, man. Yeah, I got to keep it rolling up until launch day. Question for this just popped in my head. You have two different versions of the game kind of running, and you guys are so community focused on sort of like additions to the game and giveaways, stuff like that.
Mhm.
You guys gonna have to just like 2x your output on the giveaways, like do like ETH one and then flow ones, or you just gonna alternate, or is that just a good problem to have?
I think it's a Cadillac problem, right? It's like if things are going well, folks still want stuff always. We're you know attracting a lot of people, and we'll just work harder.
There
That's
you
kind of
go.
the plan. We'll work harder. We'll scale up. We're a team of 8, so we built this whole thing from scratch, and we've operated it from the start with a team of 8 while doing a whole bunch of different stuff at the same time. And I think like this should be the bar, right? This should be the expectation of teams that are developing in Web3 and developing games in Web3. You should be impressed by what your teams can do. Those teams should not stop impressing you. They should continue to execute against the game. They should be responsive to your feedback, and the game should be updated on a regular basis based on that community feedback. Like that's common in Web 2. It's those are table stakes. I mean,
Yeah.
I think we're good. Don't get me wrong. Like I think we're a really good team, but like, games in Web 3 should just be like games in Web 2. It's more complicated, obviously, from a design space. Like there are more complications, but that's not an excuse not to be pushing content, listening to your community, running collaborations, being responsive, being accountable. Like that shit matters. It matters in Web 2, and I can guarantee you, and we see it every day, it works and matters in Web 3. So I believe in that very strongly.
Hell yeah, love it. Strong principle to stand by. 30 seconds left. If you guys want to manically scroll up and try to find that giveaway and get in, I am actually seeing some more people enter. So good stuff right at the final seconds here.
Good
But
luck.
yeah, but yeah, I love that, man. I hope for your all sake that you are looking at each other and going, what the hell? We have too many users. What the fuck are we going to do? I hope that's a problem that you all have.
Yeah, me too. I'm prepared for it, right? Like I think it'll be really interesting once we launch. Shelly and Dill were there for the Flow launch, and it's wild times launching a free to play Web3 game. So I'm mentally prepared for what's going to happen, but I think I've blacked out a lot of what happened in the Flow launch.
Understood. Yeah, it's all blurred. Congratulations, Grape Dutch. Secured the 101. He's been camping out all day waiting for this AMA, so I'm happy that he was able to lock that down. And the rich get richer. He's just a big old whale, just gobbled up some more krill.
Congratulations, Grape. He's Grape's actually been like a great community member at Dimension X for a long time, and he's given us a ton of good feedback. So really appreciate it, and well deserved, dude.
Yes, sir. Well deserved. Great. We all love Grape, and we're all super happy for him. Good stuff. Well, awesome. Shit, man. Yeah, you've pretty much knocked out the park. I don't have any questions left for you. I feel pretty good. Much better understanding of the ETH and sort of separate instances than when I came into this. So really appreciate the sort of walkthrough and the background and the ethos and all that stuff. Is there anything that we missed or anything that you would like to end on or anything that we sort of glossed over? I want to kind of give you a chance here, so feel free to take it away, brother.
Sure, man. Well, one, thank you for giving me this opportunity. Anytime I can talk about Dimension X, like for me, we're a very flat organization, right? So we make teams collectively as a group, but most often people see and hear from me. But I'm actually representing a team of incredibly passionate, hardworking people. So anytime I can get the opportunity to talk them up, I'm endlessly appreciative. Like we're the best team in Web3 games. I feel that by a mile, and I just endlessly grateful for the opportunity to work with this team because feel like we're doing special stuff. The one point that I would leave you, and I think this point is specific to Web3, and it's one that I would like internalize about Dimension X and our team in particular, which is we are a game first and foremost. We make decisions based on what's good for the game and to attract as many people to the game as possible. Like, look, I am aware that there's a secondary marketplace, that there's floors associated with it, that there's average transaction values associated with that too. I am also aware that none of those things matter if you don't have a good game backing it up. We've almost been out for a year on the Flow blockchain, right? It's not lost on me that most Web3 games are dead right now, right? They've died. Usually it's through like oversupply, but occasionally through mismanagement and some other reasons, but most teams don't get to this spot. And the reason that we've gotten to this spot is we see this and we see every NFT involved and every player involved as being a part of a game first and foremost, and that the decisions that we make are to benefit the overall game. Folks ask me a lot. They're like, what about rarity and scarcity? I care about rarity through the lens of the game itself. So I care about rarity in the instance that if things stop becoming rare in the game stops being worth playing and everything unravels from there, right? If rare things are no longer rare, then the game's not worth playing. People stop playing it. And then the secondary market does whatever it's going to do, which is probably not good things at that point. So everything really comes back to executing against the game, listening to your community and being responsive to their feedback, doing everything that you possibly can to get new users in to try the game, and making the game as broadly as broadly accessible to every type of audience that potentially exists in Web3. So that's free to play players. We have content that's reasonable and accessible for free to play players. They can progress. They can eventually mint. We've had free to play players play from Dimension X from the start. I'm not saying it's easy, but they've done it and they've minted NFT heroes just playing free to play. And that's critical, right? You have to make sure that there's content and progress for that group. You have to make sure that there's content and progress for medium-sized teams in Dimension X. And you have to make sure that there's content and progress for whales. Catering to all those groups of people requires you to be really focused on making a game that works for everybody, not just a game that works for the folks on top or a game that works for free-to-play people or a game that works for the people in the middle. So like, if there's one takeaway I would give you, it's that we're incredibly focused on executing the best game that we possibly can, because that is the thing that results in positive user growth, retention, and everything else that we've come to care about for a game to stay alive and to thrive.
Love that, man. Yeah, very, very well said. And my apologies. I know that was your send off, but I'm going to pull us back in for just one more minute here. We got some great guest questions, man. And one of them is actually perfectly aligned with what you were just saying. The free to play players and all of that stuff, onboarding users, et cetera. So I'm just going to read from the guest questions here and we'll take a stab at it. So you talked a lot about onboarding new users. And I've always felt that the path to success for this game, and that was the path to success for this game in particular. One of the things I've struggled with, particularly early when I was much closer to free to play, is that it does feel harder.
You always feel the opportunity. This is something that's prevalent across every type of player profile in the game, right? Free to play players feel like they need new heroes. Medium-sized accounts feel like they need new heroes. Whales feel like they need new heroes. Everybody feels it. So that's never going to go away. That's kind of a core aspect of the game. You always want additional heroes because the way boards roll and the number of boards that exist at any given time, you always are in this situation where you're thinking, well, if I just had something similar to this hero that's quest, or alternatively, if I had something new, I could be so much more competitive in this specific circumstance. So that's an aspect that's not going to go away. Free to play players, the way that we think about it, free to necessarily be a path for every free to play player to mint in the game. I don't think I can promise that. Even if I could promise, I think that's just going to be a moving target. It's always going to be a work in progress.
You always got to find that balance and not tip the scale too hard. Two more just quick ones, probably rapid fire these. Did you say the NFTs are going to be ERC 721s?
Yep.
Have you considered ERC 6551?
I do not know if we have, but I can talk to our senior blockchain engineer and get back to you on.
It's making some waves. I think the main thing is like tokens. It's like a wallet. It's like an NFT that's a wallet, so you can put tokens inside of that NFT. I don't know much beyond that though, but hey, man, the streets are talking.
I'll check it out. That sounds cool.
Cool. And then the other question is Grape had posted a video by Big Dude 33 on YouTube. It's a sort of a guide that he made on Dimension X. Yeah, he's asking if there's similar, more up-to-date stuff, maybe explaining the comics or the boons, other stuff like that.
Yeah, so the best way to check that stuff out, we do a weekly design stream every mechanic in the game. Web3 game guides is a great resource. So if you look in community content on Dimension X, there's a ton of great community content on there. Um, the best way to really jump into mechanics is to play the game, right? It's a free to play game, so you're going to be able to learn the mechanics at your own pace. And then we've also gone to pretty extraordinary links to make our Discord a place where you can ask questions and get answers, and not snarky answers, like real answers, especially around strategy. So yeah, my recommendation is check out Game 3 game guides, play the game because it's free to play. You can play it right now on Flow, and all you need is a Dapper wallet, which is easy to do. You just give them an email, and then you're off to the races. You can see all the mechanics, you can play through the quests, and then you can jump in Discord, read the game guides, but also you can chat with the community, which is, I have a lot of knowledge about Dimension X. Our community is a hell of a lot more.
Love that. Yeah, it's hard to beat a helpful community because you can't be everywhere at once, but they absolutely can.
That's right.
And then just a really quick, Lieutenant was the one who asked that long question about the free to play experience. He had a little follow up, just saying he was more looking at like the in-game rewards for the experiences. So like the potentially things like the 100% reward for gear expanding to other boards, or the free character boards having potentially better rewards. Maybe like 25% get a rare sidekick versus an uncommon or something like that. But just something kind of pepper in there. Think about free to players maybe, if there is a restriction where no paid hero sidekicks only, that type deal could be interesting.
Yep, for sure. I think that's totally doable. One of the things that Darren, who's our creative director, and I talk about a lot is, are there different reward tiers that we need to introduce here to be more compelling for all players, but also for free to play players, right? Like Thule is rare. It's always going to be rare, at least in the current iteration of the game. And it should be hard to come by, right? You got to compete for it. But what that means practically is that there's a subset of the player base that gets very small amounts of it very infrequently. And we need to come up with a different reward structure for those players. Obviously, gear and crafting is a big part of that. I think if you're going to see a solution, it'll be us lean more into that system to try and create something compelling and exciting for free to play players, but also medium and small size accounts.
Love it, man. Yeah, awesome. Cool. Yeah, yeah. I fully trust your vision and how you're steering the ship, man. Sounds like from the jump, you guys have approached this with the right sort of principles in place, and you're going about it in a really upstanding way, man. I wish you guys the best, and again, we appreciate you taking the time to come here talk to us. We appreciate the 101, sick as hell. Yeah, man, you guys just keep on killing it. We'll definitely have all our eyeballs on this ETH launch, and yeah, I'm sure you'll see a lot of us in game.
I appreciate that, man, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about Dimension X.
Love it. Well, thank you again, sir. And you and the rest of your team here, you guys have a fantastic night, and good luck on the launch.
Awesome. Appreciate it. And I'll keep an eye out for you guys in game.
Sounds good, brother. See you there.